Hi, I am pleased to welcome Lebanese-American and Grammy Award winning tenor Karim Sulayman, whose work moves across multiple traditions, something which is truly exemplified in the program for his upcoming show at Meany on January 17th with Scottish guitarist Sean Shibe. And the program is entitled Broken Branches. Please check it out. Karim, welcome. Good to have you here.
I'm happy to be with you.
Um, I'm hoping to start asking you about the program itself, and hopefully from the program we branch out into more your own creative
Pun
path.
intended for branch out.
Exactly, pun intended. So let's start with the title. Why that specific title, Broken Branches?
So uh it comes from a line of poetry of Sinan Antun, who wrote the poem A Butterfly in New York, which Sean and I commissioned Leal Shaker to write a song for us. Um, and the very last line of the poem is that uh, the last line is broken branch.
Mhm.
Sorry, I got brain short circuit. And we, you know, in trying to come up with a title, we thought that that was just the perfect title for it because it represents the sort of splintering of what we call the diaspora, the splintering of the wood of the guitar, which is sort of the centerpiece of the program as the sort of unifying sound world that we're in. And the program is about um our traditions and what we consider our home, and what the idea of home means to people who sort of straddle um traditional definitions of nationality, ethnicity, because both Sean and I have nationalities rooted in the West. I'm American, he's British, but our ethnic identities are that of the East because he's Japanese and I'm Lebanese. And so that's really what the program is about and where we got the title from.
That's all. I guess I'll use that to segue into my next question. Uh, Speaking from experience, I know that a lot of nostalgia undergirds the Lebanese experience abroad.
Mm, mm,
I wrote here, our culture is one of not entirely broken branches and yet not fully connected to the parent tree either.
yeah.
Uh, so I just wanted to ask you about how Lebanon showed up in your home growing up in Chicago
Hmm.
and
Well,
how
I'm
that affected, sorry, the repertoire. Yeah,
yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
no,
I'm first generation, so as you may be able to imagine, like you, for a lot of first generation people, we grow up in a household that is definitely still like rooted back in our parents' culture, and yet at the same time, I think, especially in my experience, um, that I had parents who were very intent on sort of like making sure I had the most normal, in quotes, upbringing as an American, even though I feel like maybe my parents didn't fully understand what that meant. And so, my experience anyway speaks to how, you sort of grow up American, but not really American, and you grow up Lebanese, but not really Lebanese, and so you just kind of, I think what is the experience for a lot of first generation people is you kind of straddle both and you don't know where you belong necessarily. And it isn't until I got a lot older and I went to Lebanon as an adult
Mhm.
with my parents. I think, uh, your experience as a child and growing up is very different than like what happens once you become your own person as an adult. And it was really as when I went to Lebanon with my parents as a fully formed adult that I really finally understood um, what my whole upbringing was and
Mhm.
what Lebanon then meant to them, and the fact,
Mhm.
and it's actually kind of sad if you really think about it, but they really identified their home as Lebanon, no matter how many years they ended up spending in America, and circumstance dictated what they felt like they had to do to survive and to have a what they considered at the time a better environment to raise their children in. And so it's a very moving realization then to figure out what home means to them, and then ultimately what home means to you, because they set up your home, you know and then you kind of have to go with that and figure out what home then becomes specifically to you as an adult. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, absolutely it does.
okay.
Absolutely it does. And so one thing about, I'm just gonna list the songs in Arabic. There's لما بدأ يتفنى, which is an Andalusian موشح, or sung poetic poetry, I
Mhm.
mean, from Andalusia. لبيروت, a song by Fairuz, but is based on Joaquin Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez, and El Halwa Di by Sayed Darwish. I would say not only, I mean, to what strikes me is not only that they stretch out in space, but there's also a backward-looking element in it.
Mhm.
So one thing that kind of like it came up to mind as you were talking, and I wanted to ask you that, do your parents think of the gold age of Lebanon? Do they speak like that?
Uh, it- they did, I mean,
Yeah.
again, I think like now my father's passed away now at this
Hmm.
point, but my mom and my dad, certainly they did speak that way. I think, my mom also said recently, I've spent more time now in the States than I lived in Lebanon, even though Lebanon really still considers that her home. Um, so, and there was a lot, there was always talk growing up of like, which I always found a little weird, where they said, it's the Switzerland of the Middle East or the Paris of the Middle East. And it's like,
Exactly.
why can't it just be Lebanon? Why can't it just be Beirut? Like
Mhm.
this is I mean, at the times that I've been there now, like it is like, while there is, definitely like French influence, from the colonization and all of that stuff, it's
Mhm.
still very much its own unique and very individual and very one of a kind place. I don't know
Mhm.
anything really like it. And so I wish there was the confidence and the self-worth to be able to just identify it as Beirut.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
um but yeah, the program is, you know for me
Mhm.
Sean and I started developing this program. I mean, it predates, Sean and I have known each other for a long time, but, it was really in 2020 during the pandemic when things were kind of shut down that Sean and I really like hunkered down and refined a program. And a lot of it was, based around, that my father was really sick and dying, and what did it mean, um, what did it mean to what again, not to go back to this and beat a dead horse, but what does home mean? Because I wrote about this in the notes. Home for me was always a musical identity,
Mhm.
because I did feel kind of strange growing up. And so when the pandemic kind of shut music down, and like our identity as musicians was really brought to challenge, And also my literal home was kind of, in chaos as well with my dad dying. Um, and also 4 days before my dad died, the port explosion in Beirut happened. And so there was like just like this kind of like insane confluence of events that really kind of uprooted, again, not to like use these metaphorical terms that fit so well, but it's true. It's like it just kind of uprooted a lot of like my thinking about what the hell was I doing with my life. And so the program comes from, nostalgia for sure, but also trying to like find clarity and plant a root system around like what Sean and I thought of as home and identity and all those things.
That's awesome. Um, and I relate to that because I moved to Seattle a week after the explosion. I was in
Uh,
Lebanon. Yeah.
you were in Lebanon
Yeah,
then.
I was. Yeah.
It's fucking
Yeah, it was.
crazy.
Yeah, it was. Um, so it leads me to the next question. Would you say, is it thematic? The link between the choice of Baroque, Arabic, Sephardic, and other pieces in the program. I mean, the thematic, I believe, connection is what you just talked about. What's the musical one?
Uh, well, I mean, it runs pretty smoothly as a program. I think like
Mhm.
listeners really tend to. We've done this program now kind of all over the world. We've been in East Asia, we've been in Europe, and uh, after our Seattle performance, we'll go to France. We'll be at the Aix-en-Provence Festival with this program, and
Mhm.
then finally end up at Wigmore Hall with it finally. But people, like I said, we've kind of done it all over. And what I think people notice, we do it without an intermission. And it starts, with Elizabethan and English Baroque early lute song kind of stuff and moves into the Italian Baroque, which then moves into the Mediterranean and the traditions of the Middle East and kind of comes out into 20th century and 21st century music that is then inspired. And you said there's a lot of backward looking, which is true, but also forward looking. And I think is that what people notice is the sort of cyclical nature of all of it and how sort of seamlessly all the sounds kind of end up blending together. I mean, which is great and it is intentional, but it's also like you never know how it's going to land until you do it, and it seems to land really well. And so while I don't know that we ever thought like from a musicological standpoint, because that's certainly not how my brain is wired, to like really get into like
Yeah.
history and like history as it's notated by our wonderful music historians, but like really a sort of soul connection to what the music sounds like and how it makes us feel. And ultimately I think audiences respond to that, and you'll see it, that it does sort of blend kind of seamlessly together.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I'm sure it does. Yeah. Um, I have a question about Sean and the role of the guitar
Hmm.
in what mostly, I mean, I would say is a lute-based or a oud-based program.
Hmm.
Um, I wonder how if you've had direct conversations about that with Sean or
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
I mean, listen, the guitar is the cousin of, it's a sort of modern cousin of the oud and of
Mm,
the lute. And, the oud comes, I mean, sorry, the lute comes from alud. And
mm,
so, I kind of wanted to use the guitar as this sort of like center talking piece around the whole program, that like you have music that was written for, Renaissance guitar, you have music that's written for the lute, and you have music that's traditionally performed on the oud. But if you then there's a sort of midpoint in this program with the Feiruz song and this melding of Lebanese pop with classical 20th century Spanish guitar music, that then you see this real centerpiece of what the guitar is, and how the guitar really um brings the whole thing together. And then so you have this, inspired piece or quoted piece, the Rodrigo Concierto de Aranjuez, which is a very famous guitar,
Mm-hmm.
concerto, that then moves us into music that is specifically written for modern guitar, like the shaka, like Jonathan Harvey's Sufi dance, like the Takemitsu, and then ultimately the Britain songs from the Chinese. And so, um, where you have these sort of echoes at the beginning of the program of things that, we use the guitar in a modern way, but we've realized these old songs and then arrange them ourselves, and and then we move into like things that were really meant for the guitar. And then you see how it all again kind of ties together seamlessly, and how it all, you know, there's this whole theme of the East and West in it based on our nationalities and our ethnic identities. But how there's this term that Edward Said uses of Orientalism,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's often things in Western culture that is influenced by Eastern culture, oftentimes by people who have never stepped foot in what is known as the East. And again, I don't know where that mile marker really is, but that there's what this shows is that yes, that's true, that there are Western composers taking influence of the East, but similarly, as we see with Feiruz, there's Eastern composers taking influence from the West. And so then you see that this whole idea of the cyclical nature of music, and then that really all of these things are in conversation with each other, is what's actually going on. That there isn't East and West and those ideas that tend to separate us more than they bring us together. So
Oh, I like that. I like that. I guess I'll answer your question. I guess the demarcation line is Lebanon. So
yeah.
I'll
Yeah, we have to own it all, right? Yes, absolutely.
exactly.
It's Lebanon.
Uh, I'll just end with this question. Do you have anything to say to someone coming to the concert, kind of priming them for what they're going to hear, or is that a bad question? You could also
No, it's
say
not it's
that.
not a bad question. What I would say is, I'm a I think I identify this way as a classical musician, but I've taken a lot of pride in being able to program things that I think are speaking to not only just the times that we live in the world, and sort of the good and the bad of all of that, but also that, classical music is OG here, singer-songwriter. It is classical music, and there's lots of great tunes that our favorite pop songs are influenced by, these same chord progressions and all of that stuff. And what I tend to enjoy, and I guess take pride in, is that a lot of programming in this way makes things really accessible while still honoring the traditions of classical music. And I think that that's where Sean and I really have a melding of minds, is that we're trying to move things forward, not just, in making our world better, but also in how classical music gets perceived. And I think and what I hope But what I think, because it's no longer we need to prove concept because we've done it so much, is that audiences really do respond to this program in that way of like, there's kind of just something for everybody. And it's weird, there's a lot of weird new music, but it all makes sense in the context of everything. And it's not just all weird new music because, like we've talked about, there's lots of traditional songs that we've arranged the two of us very specific to us. So you get just a very unique program. And
Oh, thank you.
I hope your audience likes it.
Oh,
So
I'm sure they will. Um, I guess then I stand corrected, not only looking back, looking forward as well.
yeah,
So I'm glad you said that because, yeah, it shows in the program. Karim, thank you so much.
thank
This was a
you.
lovely conversation. I'm looking forward to your show and to
Thanks.
seeing you in person.
Thank you. Me too.